Right now, we welcome to the Schilling Show Byron Henry, a legal and constitutional scholar, on a Georgia religious liberty law that's drawing some flack. And these religious liberty laws seem to do that wherever they are. But who are the opponents and what is behind all of this? Byron Henry, welcome to the Schilling Show.
Great to be with you, Rob.
Hey, could you give us a thumbnail on the concept of religious liberty? It seems to be a concept that is lost to many Americans today.
Well, as you know, the First Amendment of the United States Constitution protects the free exercise of religion and also provides a guarantee or a protection against the government, federal government, establishing a national religion or establishing religion. Mm-hmm. And so the very First Amendment to the Constitution was it was important to the founders that the ideas of free speech and freedom of religion be enshrined in the Bill of Rights as the First Amendment, and I think that's where it all starts. But going further than that, because of the culture change in this country, there is starting to become a conflict between individual liberty and to be free from discrimination or offense and whatnot, and people's religious beliefs that doesn't always square with conduct and other people's rights under statute or the Constitution. So we're into an area where those have come into conflict, and these religious restoration acts or protection acts the states are passing, which the federal government has and about 20 states have, are efforts to try to balance people's rights, both non-religious and religious, in the face of a changing society.
Is the order of listing in the Bill of Rights is it something that should be paid attention to here when people start looking at things and saying, well, you know, what's more important or how do we balance these things? I mean, the First Amendment, was it first for a reason?
Well, it was ratified first. Mm-hmm. I think it was ratified first for a reason because it's considered first freedoms. I mean, the freedom to worship God freely, the founders spoke about that going on, and the need for free speech. So I think, you know, from a founding standpoint and the way the Constitution was ratified and in the debates on the Constitution, it's clear that the freedom of speech and freedom of religion are what I would consider foundational freedoms or first freedoms recognized by the Constitution and should be protected.
We're talking with Byron Henry, legal and constitutional scholar. Let's go to the specifics of the Georgia law. So what it is and what it isn't, because this gets confused sometimes.
Well, I think the confusion is, first of all, what it is not that controversial in this respect, and that is it is a affirmative protection that might have already existed, but just in case it did not, based on some court decisions and commentary, that religious officials that are ordained to perform marriages are not required and cannot be held liable for refusing to perform any marriage that they deem objectionable to their religious or their faith. So therefore, a pastor, a rabbi, or any ordained minister of any faith is free to decline participating or performing a marriage if they don't want to, and they can't be sued or there's no private action. They can't be held responsible. Likewise, churches and schools and religious schools and other associations that have buildings that rent out their buildings, for instance, at certain times, even for profit or for money, they can't be held liable for refusing to rent their building or provide accommodation to groups that don't share their religious belief or that are in conflict with their religious belief. So those are non-controversial aspects of the bill. The more controversial aspects of the bill go towards whether or not it actually goes a step further and would allow a non-religious, just a business owner that owns a non-religious business, such as a bakery or whatnot, to refuse to serve. And reading the language and the protections in there, I don't believe that the bill does provide that a person could refuse to just serve, you know, in a secular business, people because of their sexual orientation. I don't believe that's part of the bill, but that is one of the complaints, that maybe it's broad enough to allow people to just turn down service at a restaurant or whatnot because of someone's sexual orientation, and that's the fear on the other side, that it goes too far.
So, Byron, what has been the corporate reaction in Georgia? Has there been a response to this? Because it seems every time these sorts of laws pop up, a lot of corporations start exerting pressure.
Well, there's been somewhat of a reaction. At least it's been notable in the news from Walt Disney, for instance, the NFL, the NCAA, different organizations which are important to business and important to the economic well-being of a state and local governments. And they simply believe that this is a pro-discrimination statute as opposed to a religious freedom, which is kind of a battle of semantics, but couched in a pro-discrimination statute. I mean, no one is pro-discrimination. No one wants people to be treated unfairly or degraded based on certain attributes or status, especially in public. But the problem is that when you protect someone's religious beliefs, you're protecting a choice whether or not to engage in something or to condone it in some form or fashion. And some of these companies have said that they will pull out of the state. They won't film in Georgia. Georgia has a huge film industry. I believe it's third only to New York and California as far as film production revenue. So that's a big deal if Walt Disney pulls out there, as well as the NFL passing over Atlanta, for instance, for future Super Bowls. So it's definitely a policy conflict that there's a lot of issues that have to be weighed. Maybe they could move them all to North Carolina. Well, North Carolina just passed a bill that was signed by the governor that's probably going to get it into trouble as well with businesses and possibly the NFL, because they basically just rescinded statewide all anti-discrimination provisions that are in that cities had passed over the last few years, and they decided to make it a state-level issue, meaning the state is the only person or the only entity that can now provide specific protection from discrimination for groups based on status, such as sex, race, religion, national origin, and things like that. So now the cities, it basically wiped the city ordinances off just repealed them all in one fell swoop. So there are no longer any anti-discrimination provisions at the city level in North Carolina. Right, and I looked at this, and it appeared that this was brought on by something that happened in Charlotte, where they wanted to allow men who were posing as women to go into women's restrooms. It sounds to me like we're in an insane asylum here, and if the Founding Fathers were looking at the sorts of constitutional arguments being made to protect such behavior, I mean, that sort of behavior certainly wasn't tolerated in their day, and they would be spinning in their graves, in my opinion. Well, it certainly wasn't contemplated by the framers, and certainly these are not constitutional requirements. These are statutory and city ordinances. The Constitution has one very firm anti-discrimination provision, and that is race, that it's a colorblind constitution, but the additional protections based on national origin and different things, those are all statutory and civil rights acts and anti-discrimination provisions at the state and local levels. But certainly that was the big controversy, is because it included this gender identity provision. It wasn't just an anti-discrimination provision. It actually included a gender identity provision, and that's what prompted the legislature to act so quickly, because it would have allowed those to use whatever restroom they felt they were identified with. We've got real problems in America. I'm so glad that you're taking what I would call a reasonable approach to all this. Byron Henry, if people want to visit you online or get more information about the work you do, let's tell them how, please. Sure. I am at the law firm of Scheef Stone in Dallas, Texas, and my website is www.solidcounsel.com. Thanks so much for joining us today on The Schilling Show. Happy Good Friday. Thank you, Rob. And to you as well. Okay.